There's a question I never thought I'd have to answer in my lifetime. Can a photograph protect a building? Can the image of a teenage boy who died nearly 2 decades ago keep evil at bay? If you'd asked me that question 5 years ago, I would have laughed, politely. Of course I was raised to be courteous, but I would have dismissed it as superstition, as magical thinking, as everything my rational mind had been trained to reject. My name is Alessandra Conti. For 23 years, I served as the director of the Bon Vicin della Riva Civic Library in the heart of Milan, Italy, just steps away from Piazza Cordusio. It's a mid-sized, municipal library, 3 floors of books, quiet reading rooms, the familiar smell of paper and wood, and that constant hum of computers that now accompanies every modern library. I'd always believed mine was the most beautiful job in the world, safeguarding stories, facilitating knowledge, watching young students discover the magic of reading. I'm a practical woman, rational, logical. I was raised in a Milanese family, where efficiency and reason were fundamental values. My father was a civil engineer who specialized in bridges and infrastructure. My mother taught mathematics at Vittorio Veneto Scientific High School. In our home, we discussed differential equations, not miracles. We talked about scientific proof, not blind faith. We weren't militant atheists. Mind you, religion simply occupied a very marginal space in our lives. We attended Mass on Christmas and Easter, more out of tradition than deep conviction. And the first, following that family blueprint, had become a meticulous librarian attentive to data, statistics, and standard operating procedures. The library I directed perfectly reflected this philosophy. Every book cataloged with the Dewey System, every procedure documented in operational manuals, every decision supported by cost-benefit analysis. My colleagues respected me precisely for this ability to manage everything with almost Swiss-like method. When there was a technical problem with the servers, I called the technicians and waited for precise diagnoses. When there was conflict among staff members, I convened meetings, listened to all parties, made decisions based on regulations. Never not once, in 23 years of my career had I made an important decision based on instinct, emotion, or something I couldn't measure or quantify. To give you an idea of who I am, when my husband Stefano, who's an architect, proposed to me at sunset by Lake Como, my first reaction was to check the weather statistics to verify that the sunset would actually be visible. He laughed and hugged me, saying that's precisely why he loved me. We'd been married for 18 years when the events I'm about to tell you began, and Stefano knew me perfectly. He knew that for me, everything had to have a logical explanation. Everything. But then something happened that shattered every certainty I'd ever held. Something that forced me to confront a reality I'd spent my entire life denying. That there are forces in this world, or perhaps beyond this world, that operate according to laws our science cannot measure. This is my story. The story of how a portrait of a teenage saint taught me that faith and reason aren't enemies. They're partners in understanding a reality far more mysterious and wonderful than I'd ever imagined. March 2018, the Bon Vicin della Riva Library occupies an early 20th century building, renovated in the 1990s to house this public service. 3 floors, about 2,000 square meters, 35,000 cataloged volumes, 500 active registered users, an average of 120 visitors daily. Numbers. Concrete data. This was my world. The entrance hall was spacious, with light marble flooring, ceilings 4 meters high, large windows facing the street. 2. Thereat stood the lending desk, made of oak wood, 6 meters long. To the left, a wrought iron staircase leading to the upper floors, and straight ahead, on the wall between the 2 large windows, hung a reproduction of the Library of Alexandria, anonymous image, purchased from an office furniture supplier. Nothing special, just neutral decoration. That's what hung there for the first 17 years of my tenure, until everything changed on a Tuesday afternoon in March 2018. I remember it perfectly. March 13th. A gray, rainy day typical of Milanese spring, when it still can't decide whether to remain winter or finally become beautiful weather. I was in my third-floor office, immersed in compiling the budget forecast for the following year, when my assistant Chiara knocked on the door. "Dr. Conti, Mrs. Brambilla is here to see you. She has a package and says it's important." Margherita Brambilla, 75 years old, widowed for 10 years, a retired literature teacher, voracious reader, and historic benefactor of the library. Over the years, she'd donated at least 400 books from her personal collection, all quality volumes, well, often with handwritten dedications from authors she'd met during her long career. She was one of my favorite patrons, always kind, never intrusive, with that discreet elegance that belongs to a certain generation of Milanese women. "Show her. And Chiara, I'll be right down." When I descended to the ground floor, I found her standing near the lending desk, wearing a perfectly pressed beige coat, a silk scarf around her neck, her white hair gathered in an impeccable chignon. Beside her, resting on the counter, was a rectangular package wrapped in ivory-colored tissue paper. "Mrs. Margherita?" I greeted her with a smile. "What a pleasure to see you. Chiara tells me you wanted to speak with me." Her face lit up. "Dr. Conti?" "Yes. I have something special to donate to the library. Something I think could be precious for the young people who frequent this place." She carefully unwrapped the tissue paper, revealing a simple but elegant dark wood frame. Inside was an enlarged photograph of a young boy, a teenager. He had deep, dark eyes, a gaze that seemed to look beyond the camera lens, as if he could see something we couldn't. He wore a red sweatshirt with a sports logo I didn't recognize. Around his neck, a thin chain that gleamed slightly in the light. His smile was sweet, almost shy, but there was something luminous about that face, something that captured attention. "Who is he?" I asked, observing the image with professional curiosity. "His name is Carlo Acutis," Mrs. Brambilla replied, and in her voice was a particular tenderness. "He was a Milanese boy, born in London but raised here, just a few miles from this library. He died in 2006, at only 15 years old, from fulminant leukemia. But in that brief life, he accomplished something extraordinary." She told me the story as we stood there, beside the counter. Carlo was an apparently normal boy in every way. He loved video games, computers, soccer, animals, but he had a profound faith, a devotion to the Eucharist that was rare even among adults. He attended Mass every day when he could. He prayed the rosary, and he'd used his computer skills to create a website about Eucharistic miracles around the world, cataloging hundreds of documented cases of hosts that became flesh, chalices that exuded blood, inexplicable phenomena linked to the real presence of Christ in the Eucharist. In July 2018, Mrs. Brambilla continued, "Pope Francis declared him venerable. He's on the path to beatification, and I believe that today's young people need to know boys like him. Normal boys who lived extraordinary lives." I looked at the portrait again. The brass plaque beneath the photograph read, "Venerab Carlo Acutis, 1991 to 2006. Patron of the Internet and young people. You'd like to donate this portrait to the library?" I asked, trying to understand exactly what she was requesting. "Yes, Doctor. I'd like it hung here, in the entrance hall. Not invasively. I don't want it to seem like an imposition, but simply as a presence, as a silent friend for those who come here, seeking knowledge." Carlo loved culture, loved learning. I think this is the right place for him. I hesitated, not out of malice or intolerance, but because of that natural bureaucratic caution of mine. A municipal library is a public, secular space. Hanging the image of a Catholic venerable could raise questions, complaints, administrative problems. On the other hand, Mrs. Brambilla was a historic benefactor, and that boy, that Carlo, didn't seem like a controversial figure. He wasn't an ancient saint with a complicated political history. He was simply a teenager who'd believed in something deeply and lived according to that faith. Mrs. Margarita? I said after a few seconds of reflection. I must be honest with you. Hanging a religious image in a municipal public space could create discussions, not because I'm opposed, but because there are regulations, principles of secularism I must respect. Her face darkened slightly, but she didn't surrender. Doctor, I understand your concerns, but consider this. Carlo wasn't a fanatic. He wasn't someone who imposed his ideas. He was a boy who used the internet to spread culture, who saw technology as a tool of beauty, not destruction. In a sense, he represents exactly what this library wants to be. A bridge between tradition and modernity. She had a valid point, and honestly, looking at that young face in the photograph, I couldn't see anything threatening or problematic. He was just a boy who died too young, certainly, but a boy who had loved knowledge. All right, I finally decided. I accept the donation. We'll hang the portrait in the entrance hall, in a visible but not central position, and we'll see how users react. If there are complaints or problems, we might have to reconsider. The smile that illuminated Mrs. Brambilla's face was worth any bureaucratic risk. Thank you, Doctor. Thank you so much. You won't regret this. The portrait finds its home. The portrait was hung the following day, Wednesday, March 14th, 2018. Luca, our IT technician, a 32-year-old, with a hipster beard and an endless collection of hooded sweatshirts, handled the installation. He chose the wall between the two windows, directly opposite the lending desk, at a height of about 2 meters from the ground, perfect for being seen by those entering, but not so invasive as to dominate the space. When the work was completed, I stood for a few minutes, observing the result. The portrait integrated well into the environment. The dark wood frame harmonized with the oak of the counter, and that young face, with that profound gaze, seemed to look at whoever entered with a sort of good-natured curiosity. Who's the kid? Luca asked as he put away his tools. Carlo Acutis, a Catholic, venerable, died young, loved technology. You might like his story? Luca shrugged. I'm not a believer, Alessandra. You know that. But if he was a guy who understood computers, I already like him. In the days and weeks that followed, I noticed something curious. The portrait didn't go unnoticed as I'd anticipated. Users, especially younger ones, stopped to look at it. Some approached, read the plaque, then pulled out their smartphones and searched for information. One morning, I found 2 high school girls, maybe 17 or 18 years old, standing in front of the portrait. One was photographing the image with her cell phone. Excuse me, I intervened in a gentle tone. Can I help you? They turned, slightly embarrassed at being caught. No, thanks. It's just that we didn't know about this Carlo. We searched on Google, and his story is incredible. Incredible how? I asked, genuinely curious. Well, he was our age when he died, and he had a website about Eucharistic miracles that's still used today. He was a programmer, like we want to become, and he believed in God in a, I don't know, modern way. Not bigoted. That conversation struck me more than I wanted to admit. The portrait was creating conversations, stimulating curiosity. And for a librarian, that was pure gold. The months passed. The portrait became part of the library's landscape. Mrs. Brambilla continued to come regularly, at least 3 times a week. Every time, before heading to the historical fiction section she loved so much, she stopped in front of the portrait. She'd bow her head, close her eyes, move her lips, in silent prayer. Sometimes I'd see her eyes glisten when she finished. Once I asked if she was all right, and she smiled. I'm just thanking Carlo for the graces received. I didn't ask what graces. I respected her privacy. The beatification in 2020, an important event occurred. On October 10th, Carlo Acutis was beatified in Assisi. The news made the rounds of Italian media. A young, modern blessed, the saint of jeans and sweatshirts, as the newspapers called him. Mrs. Brambilla came to the library that day with red, emotional eyes, and a small bouquet of white flowers that she placed at the foot of the portrait. "He's become a blessed doctor," she told me in a trembling voice. "Our Carlo is blessed." I updated the plaque. From venerable to blessed, a small change that seemed to mean a lot to the library patrons who now knew him. The years between 2018 and 2024 were quiet. The library prospered. We implemented a cutting-edge digital lending system. I created study rooms, equipped with modern computer workstations. We organized cultural events, book presentations, conferences, children's workshops. The numbers were excellent, increasing attendance, stable loans despite competition from ebooks, user satisfaction at historic highs. Carlo's portrait remained there, a silent witness to all this activity, and I, rational and pragmatic as always, gave it no particular importance. It was just a decorative element among many, nothing more. But in the autumn of 2024, things changed. The June municipal elections had brought a new majority to the city council, a coalition that made state secularism one of its main programmatic points. They weren't anti-clerical in the aggressive sense of the term, but they firmly believed in a clear separation between public institutions and religious symbols. The new councillor for culture was attorney Giuliano Ferretti, 52 years old, a civil lawyer with an office downtown, a reputation for inflexibility on legal principles. I'd met him only once, during an official event, and he'd seemed cordial but rigid. On November 5, 2024, a circular arrived from the culture department. I read it in my third-floor office, sitting at my oak desk while outside fell that fine, persistent rain Milan knows so well. The circular was brief, clear, unequivocal. In compliance with the constitutional principle of state secularism, and in order to guarantee the neutrality of municipal public spaces, the removal of any symbol, image, object, or representation of a confessional nature is ordered from all libraries, cultural centers, municipal offices, and public structures dependent on the municipality of Milan by and no later than December 31st.2024. This provision applies to crucifixes, statues of saints, religious images, devotional paintings, and any other element attributable to a specific religious confession. Any non-compliance will be reported to internal oversight bodies and could constitute grounds for disciplinary responsibility. I sat, frozen, the paper in my hand, feeling the weight of those words. My first thought, immediate and precise, went to the portrait in the entrance hall. Carlo Acutis, the blessed in the red sweatshirt. Was it technically a religious symbol? The answer, according to the circular, was obviously yes. He was a Catholic, blessed, therefore, by definition, an image of a confessional nature. But there was something that didn't convince me. Carlo wasn't a crucifix. He wasn't a statue of a saint in a devotional attitude. He was the photograph of a boy who had really existed, who had died young, who had used technology to spread culture. Was he really the same type of religious symbol as a crucifix hanging on a wall? That evening, at dinner with my husband Stefano, I told him about the situation. Stefano, always pragmatic, said, "Love, the law is clear. If it says religious symbols, and a blessed is a religious symbol, you have to remove it. You can't risk disciplinary sanctions for a portrait." "I know," I replied, nervously playing with my fork. "But that portrait has been there for 6 years. It's become part of the library. The kids love it, and Mrs. Brambilla will understand. She's an intelligent person." He was right, of course, but that night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about that young face in the entrance hall, about all the kids who had stopped to look at it, about the conversations it had sparked, and about Mrs. Brambilla, praying in front of that portrait 3 times a week. The next morning, Thursday, November 6th, I convened an emergency staff meeting. There were 8 of us. Me, Dr. Moretti, 65 years old, senior librarian, with 40 years of service. Chiara 27, Assistant librarian, Luca 32. IT technician, then Elena and Martina, the 2 reading room assistants, Paolo, head of the book warehouse, and Mrs. Russa, cleaning supervisor. 60 years of Milanese folk wisdom. I presented the circular, explained the situation, tried to be as neutral as possible. I wanted to hear their opinions before making a formal decision. Dr. Moretti was the first to speak. His voice was firm, but there was a note of bitterness. Alessandra, I've been working in this library since before you were born. I've seen administrations, counselors, political fashions come and go. That portrait doesn't bother anyone. In fact, the kids like it. It's a symbol of culture, not religious imposition. Removing it would be a mistake. Kira, always attentive to legal aspects, intervened immediately after. Director? I understand, Dr. Moretti, but the circular is very clear. If we don't comply, we all risk consequences. Not just you, but all of us. They could contest an attitude of insubordination. And in a historical moment where public employment is always under attack, we can't afford disciplinary problems. Lucas scratched his beard, thoughtful. I'm an atheist, guys. You know that. I don't believe in God, saints, miracles. But I have to say something. That portrait represents a guy who knew how to use computers better than many modern IT professionals. He made a website at 12 years old that still works today and is visited by thousands of people. For me, that's not a religious symbol. It's a symbol of digital competence, of passion for knowledge. I don't see why we should remove it. Irina, a shy 25-year-old girl who'd been working with us for 3 years, raised her hand, almost apologizing for intervening. Can I say something? I'm Protestant, not Catholic, but I like that portrait because Carlo represents something universal, the possibility of being young, modern, and having deep values. It's not about being Catholic or not, it's about being authentic. The discussion continued for over an hour. Everyone brought valid arguments, different perspectives. Paolo, the warehouse manager, simply said, I never think about that portrait. It's never bothered me. If we have to remove it because of a circular, okay, but it seems stupid to me. Mrs. Rosa, who rarely spoke during official meetings, raised her voice with that tight Milanese accent of hers. Dr. Conti, I've been here for 20 years. I saw that portrait arrive in 2080. And I'll tell you something. Since it's been here, the atmosphere has changed. It's more, I don't know how to say it, more serene. The kids are calmer. There are fewer fights, less vandalism, fewer problems. Maybe it's a coincidence. Maybe it's whatever. But I notice it. Her words struck me. I'd never considered them. Was it true that since 2018, incidents of vandalism or problematic behavior had decreased dramatically? I went to check the reports. Indeed, the data showed a 67% drop in reported incidents, but correlating this to the portrait seemed absurd. It had to be for other reasons. New security policies, more staff presence, general neighborhood improvement. At the end of the meeting, I made the decision that seemed most correct from a formal and procedural point of view. Thank you all for your contributions. I understand your emotions and share many of your concerns, but the circular is binding. I can't ignore it. I'll contact Mrs. Brambilla to return the portrait to her, explaining the situation with the utmost respect. The portrait will be removed by the end of the year, as required. I saw Dr. Moretti shake his head, disappointed. Chiara nodded, relieved that I'd chosen the path of formal compliance with the rules. Luca shrugged with that attitude of, I said my piece. Do what you want. The others remained silent. That evening, I called Mrs. Brambilla. It was one of the most difficult conversations of my professional life. Her voice, when I explained the situation, trembled. Not with anger, but with profound sadness. Dr. Conti, I understand that you must follow the rules. I don't blame you. But let me tell you something. Carlo protects that library. He always has, since his portrait has been there. I've seen beautiful things happen in that place. Kids converting, people finding peace, conflicts resolving miraculously. removing it. Removing it means removing a protection. I tried to be kind, but firm. Mrs. Margarita, please understand my position. It's not a personal choice. It's an administrative obligation, and if I didn't want to take it back, she asked, with a note of defiance I'd never heard from her before, then I'd have to keep it in storage. According to procedures for goods donated, and then refused by the original donors, there was a long silence on the phone. I could hear her heavy breathing, as if she were fighting back tears. Then, with a controlled but firm voice, she said, "Do what you must, doctor, but remember my words. Carlo protects that library, and when you remove a protection, things change. Not always for the better." Those words stayed with me, but I filed them away as the excessive emotional attachment of an elderly, devout woman. I couldn't make administrative decisions based on feelings or personal beliefs. December 18, 2024. The removal. We decided to remove the portrait on December 18th, a Wednesday, early enough before Christmas to respect the circular's timeline, but close enough to the holidays to hope attention would be minimal. I put Luca in charge of the operation. He was the most practical, the least emotionally involved. That morning I arrived at the library at 8 o'clock sharp. As always, the sky was leaden gray, threatening snow. The temperature had dropped sharply overnight, and Milan had that gloomy winter appearance well known to those who live there. At 9:30, Luca took the portable ladder, the screwdriver, and began the operation. I was in my office, but I asked Chiara to keep me informed. She later told me the scene had been surreal. Some users, seeing Luca climb up to remove the portrait, had stopped. An elderly lady asked, "Why are you taking down the boy?" Luca had responded with the bureaucratic formula we'd agreed on. Reorganization of exhibition spaces. A college girl, with a backpack full of engineering books, approached Chiara. "You're really taking it down? But why?" "It was the only beautiful thing in this entrance hall. I liked seeing it when I came in. It gave me, I don't know, a feeling of calm." The portrait was removed at 9. Luca brought it to my office, leaned it against the wall behind my desk. Carlo's face looked at me from there, with those deep, dark eyes. For a moment, I swear on everything I hold dear, I had the sensation that he was disappointed. Not angry, just disappointed. I shook my head, ridiculing myself internally. A portrait can't feel emotions. It can't look. It can't judge. On the entrance hall wall remained a lighter rectangle. 6 years of exposure had protected that portion of paint from sunlight exposure. The contrast was evident, almost accusatory. Luca promised he'd repaint over the weekend, and it was then, at that precise moment, that it began. The anomalies begin. The first anomaly occurred that same Wednesday afternoon, December 18th, at 2:47 p.m. I know precisely because I checked the time on my watch when Chiara ran into my office, pale. "Alessandra, the sister has gone into total lockup." I immediately went down to the ground floor. The scene was chaotic. All 7 terminals of the lending system displayed the exact same blue screen. Not the classic Windows blue screen of death, but something different. A completely azure screen, without any error message, without codes, without anything, just pure blue. "When did this happen?" I asked Martina, who was at the counter. "A few minutes ago. We were processing alone, and suddenly, all the computers shut down and restarted with the screen." I called Luca. He came running from the 2nd floor, sat down at one of the terminals, started typing commands, checking connections, rebooting servers. I watched him work for 20 minutes, increasingly frustrated. "Alessandra," he finally said, turning toward me with a perplexed expression. "This doesn't make sense." "What doesn't make sense?" "There's no technical reason for this lockup. I've checked everything. Server, network connections, electrical power, software, everything is working perfectly. But the computers are locked on this screen and don't respond to any command. How is that possible?" "I don't know. It's as if someone had pressed an invisible switch and shut everything down simultaneously." but there's no trace of remote access, no malware, nothing. After an hour of attempts, the system came back online, suddenly, without Luca doing anything particular. It rebooted on its own, displaying normal screens, as if nothing had happened. "I'm checking the logs," Luca said, still bewildered. He examined the system log files for 10 minutes, then looked at me. "The logs are empty. There's no trace of the lockup. It's as if it never happened." But it had happened. We'd been stopped for an hour. We'd lost loans, created inconvenience for users, and we had no explanation. That evening, as I returned home on the subway, I tried to rationalize. Technical problems happen. Computers have inexplicable glitches. It was just a coincidence that it happened on the same day as the portrait's removal. But the next morning, Thursday, December 19th, rationalization became more difficult. The unnatural cold eye arrived at the library at 8. As always, as soon as I entered the entrance hall, I stopped dead. Something was wrong. The air. It was different. Cold. Not cold, like when you enter an unheated building, but cold in a strange, unnatural way, as if someone had installed an industrial air conditioner set to polar temperatures. Kira, who had already arrived, was sitting at the lending desk, completely wrapped in a heavy wool scarf, with her leather gloves still on. Her lips were slightly purplish. "Kira, what's going on? It's freezing in here." "I know, Director. I arrived at 7:30, and it was already like this. I checked the radiators. They're all on at maximum, but it feels like being in a freezer." I touched one of the radiators near the counter. It was boiling hot. It emanated visible heat. The air trembled above the metal plates, but the ambient temperature was freezing. I called municipal maintenance. 2 technicians arrived at 10, armed with digital thermometers, sensors, various instruments. I watched them work for 2 hours. They checked the boilers in the basement, inspected the radiators, verified the pipes, tested the ventilation system. The team leader, a massive 50-year-old man with gray mustache and hands as big as shovels, called me aside. "Madam Director, I have to tell you something that doesn't make sense." "I'm ready to hear things that don't make sense," I replied, feeling a strange anxiety growing. "The heating system works perfectly. In fact, it's producing heat above normal. The radiators are at 95 degrees, when normally they're at 70. The boiler is working at maximum capacity. Theoretically, with this heat output, it should be 77, 82 degrees Fahrenheit in here, and instead, he consulted his digital thermometer. 57 degrees. Stable throughout the building. It doesn't make thermodynamic sense. It's impossible. But that's how it is. What do you suggest I do?" He shrugged, defeated. "Honestly, I don't know. From a technical standpoint, there's nothing we can do. The system works. It's the physics that seems not to be working." The cold persisted all day. Users complained. Some left. The reading rooms, usually crowded with students preparing for January exams, remained half empty. Dr. Moretti, in his heavy coat, looked at me and said, "Only, you took it down yesterday." "What?" "The portrait. You took it down yesterday. And today the strangeness begins." "Are you serious?" "You think there's a connection?" "I believe that when you remove certain presences, the consequences make themselves felt." "But what do I know? I'm just an old superstitious librarian." I didn't want to agree with him. I couldn't. It would mean abandoning everything I believed in. Rationality, logic, scientific explanation. The Flying Books. Friday, December 20th. 3rd day after the portrait's removal. I arrived at the library with a sense of apprehension I tried to ignore. The cold was still there, perhaps slightly diminished, but present. And then something happened that I could no longer ignore. Mrs. Rosa, the cleaning supervisor, was waiting for me in the entrance hall. Her face was white as chalk. "Doctor," she said in a thin voice, "you need to come see." In the entrance hall, exactly beneath the lighter rectangle on the wall where Carlo's portrait had hung. There were books scattered on the floor. Not one or two, at least 30 volumes, arranged in an almost perfect circle, as if someone had positioned them there with geometric care. "When did you find them?" I asked Mrs. Rosa. "When I arrived, at 7. "But, doctor, this is the second time." "The second?" "Yes. I found them yesterday morning, when I came early to clean, before opening. I picked them all up, put them back on the shelves, and this morning, they're here, again. Same books, same place." I bent down to pick up one of the volumes. It was Milan, in the 15th century, a local history book, bound in green cloth. I opened it. On the first page, a faded pencil dedication. "To the library, with affection, Emma V. Nisen Jugo, Emma V. Marugeri Taburambira." I picked up another book. The Betrothed, annotated edition. Same dedication, same year. Then another, and another. I checked all 30 volumes. Each bore Mrs. Bramble's signature. Each had been donated by her over the years. A shiver ran down my spine. Not a shiver of cold, but a shiver of something else. Of fear? Of awareness? I couldn't define it. "Mrs. Rosa," I asked, trying to keep my voice steady, "did you hear noises last night? Someone entering?" "No, doctor, and the alarm didn't go off. I checked. No one entered here last night." Luca arrived shortly after, saw the scene, and his skeptical, rational attitude began to crack. "Alessandra, this is getting weird." We put the books back on the shelves, all of them, carefully. I documented every position, noted every title. Then, for safety, I asked Luca to install a camera pointed at the entrance hall. We wanted to see what was happening. At 11:30, that same Friday morning, while I was in my office responding to emails, Luca burst in without knocking. His face was shocked. "Alessandra, the books, they're on the floor again." I ran downstairs. It was true. The same 30 volumes, arranged in the same perfect circle, exactly under the point where the portrait had been. How is this possible? "We put them back an hour ago." "Look," Luca said, pointing at the camera he'd installed. I pointed the camera exactly there. "Let's watch the recording." We went to his second-floor office. Luca opened the surveillance software on his computer, selected the entrance hall camera, rewound to 11 o'clock. We watched the video. At first, the shelves were full, the books in their places. Then, at 11 hours, 17 minutes and 33 seconds, something happened that froze my blood more than the library's unnatural cold. The books began to move. They didn't fall noisily. They weren't pushed by someone. They simply slid out of the shelves, one after another, in orderly sequence. As if invisible hands were taking them gently, they floated in the air for 2 or 3 seconds, didn't fall, and then settled on the ground, forming that perfect circle, all in absolute silence. No noise, no thud. Luca rewound the video, watched it again, then a third time. His hands trembled on the keyboard. This isn't possible," he whispered. "I'm seeing it too," I replied, feeling my voice almost alien. "No, Alessandra, you don't understand. This is physically impossible. Books don't float. They don't move on their own. They don't create perfect geometries. This violates every law of physics." "Then how do you explain it?" Luca ran a hand through his hair. "Destroyed. I don't know. And that terrifies me." That evening, I convened an emergency meeting. Only the core group. Me, Luca, Chiara, Dr. Moretti. We sat in my third-floor office. Carlo's portrait was there, leaning against the wall, watching us with those dark eyes. "We need to talk," I began, trying to maintain a professional tone despite everything. "Things are happening that I can't explain." I told them everything. The computers, the cold, the books. I showed them the camera video. I saw Chiara turn pale. I saw Dr. Moretti nod slowly, as if he'd always known it would go this way. "There's a rational explanation," Kira said, but her voice was uncertain. There has to be. Which one? Luca asked. I'm an IT technician. I work with logic, and what's happening here defies all logic. Computers locked up for no reason. Heat disappears into thin air. Books fly. What rational explanation can you give? Maybe there's a magnetic field, or electrical interference. Or, Chiara. Dr. Moretti gently interrupted. Sometimes the rational explanation is that there are things our reason cannot explain. I turned to him. Do you believe it's because of the portrait's removal? I believe Carlo protected this library, and I believe we removed that protection. I don't know how it works. I don't know why it works, but I know that since that portrait arrived in 2018, this library has been a more serene, safer, more alive place. Alive place, and I know that since we took it down, it's as if something broke. But this is irrational, I protested, though feeling my conviction waver. Is it? Dr. Moretti asked, looking me in the eyes. Alessandra, you're an intelligent woman, cultured, educated in the scientific method, but answer honestly, does what's happening here have a scientific explanation? I didn't respond, because the answer was no. That evening, returning home, I stopped in a church. I hadn't done so in years. I entered the church of San Carlo al Corso, one of many Milan churches I usually ignore in my daily life. I sat in a back pew, in the dark, and for the first time, in a very long time, I prayed. Not a structured prayer, just a confused whisper. If there's someone out there, if there's something beyond what I can see and measure, give me a sign. Help me understand. The weekend passed in a strange and restless way. Saturday and Sunday, the library was closed, but Monday, December 23rd, when we reopened, things got worse. That Monday morning, when I opened the main door, I was hit by a smell. Not unpleasant, quite the opposite. It was a sweet, intense, almost overwhelming fragrance. Rose, incense, something ancient and sacred. Kira arrived shortly after and smelled the same thing. God, what a smell! Who brought incense here? No one had brought anything. Yet the smell pervaded the entire library, but it was particularly strong in the entrance hall, exactly where the portrait had been. Dr. Moretti arrived, sniffed the air, and his face lit up with recognition. It's the same fragrance. What fragrance? I asked. The one you smell in the basilica, where Carlo Acutis is buried. I was there last year with a group of pilgrims. It's identical, a fragrance of mystical roses. Impossible to replicate. I wanted to contradict him, but I couldn't, because that smell was truly particular, different from any commercial perfume or incense I knew. Then, at 10 in the morning, something happened that definitively shattered my rationality. I was in my office when I heard a tremendous boom from downstairs. Not a normal noise, a violent, metallic crash, followed by a sharp scream. I ran down the stairs at a speed I didn't recognize in myself. The scene I found was nightmarish. One of the shelves in the fiction section had collapsed. It hadn't simply tilted or shifted. It had completely collapsed, as if someone had yanked it with brutal force. Hundreds of books were scattered everywhere, some with bent pages, others open in unnatural ways. But the worst thing was Kira. She was sitting on the floor, 3 meters from the shelf, her face deathly white, her eyes wide open, in total shock. Martina was beside her, trying to calm her. Kira. I knelt beside her. Are you hurt? She shook her head, unable to speak. Her lips trembled. Martina intervened. She's in shock, but physically she's fine. Director, something crazy happened. Tell me. Kira was just walking past the shelf. I was 5 meters away. Suddenly, I saw a light, a bluish light, like LED lights, but more intense. It appeared right where the shelf is now on the ground, and a second later, everything collapsed. The shelf came down suddenly, and Chiara was pushed back. She didn't fall. She was actually pushed. as if someone had grabbed her and dragged her away from danger. I looked at Kira. "Is that true?" She nodded, finally finding her voice. I was walking by, and I felt a puff of warm air on my back, then pressure. Like hands pushing me, and I found myself here, away from the shelf, while it collapsed. "Alessandra, someone saved me," but there was no one there. I inspected the collapsed shelf. It was robust metal, designed to support hundreds of pounds of books. The screws anchoring it to the wall had come loose, but the metal around the anchor holes showed no signs of wear, deformation, or failure. It was as if the screws had simply unscrewed themselves, all simultaneously, with surgical precision. I called a structural expert. He arrived in the afternoon, examined everything meticulously, took measurements, took photographs. His report, which I received 2 days later, simply read, "Sudden structural failure. Technical cause. Impossible to determine." Note: the shelf's conditions at the time of collapse were optimal, with no warning signs of failure. In other words, it had collapsed for no reason. That evening, after everyone had left, I stayed alone in the library, sitting in the entrance hall, exactly in front of the lighter rectangle on the wall where the portrait had hung. I looked at that empty wall, and felt the weight of everything that had happened. 3 days. Only 3 days since the portrait's removal, and the library had become a place of inexplicable, disturbing, impossible events. I closed my eyes, and in that silence, I did something I never thought I'd do in my rationale, methodical life. I spoke, out loud, to a boy who died 18 years earlier. "Carlo," I whispered, feeling ridiculous but also desperate. "If it's you, if there really is something, you have to make me understand, because I no longer know what to think. I no longer know what to believe." The silence was total for a few seconds. Then, slowly, one by one, every single light in the library went out. The darkness was absolute, complete, suffocating. My heart stopped. I couldn't breathe. And then, with deliberate slowness, the lights returned, but not in the random order they'd gone out. They came back on, forming a path, a luminous trail that from the entrance hall led up the stairs, to the 3rd floor, to my office, where the portrait was. I stood up, my legs trembling. I followed that path of light. I climbed the stairs, one step at a time. I entered my office. The portrait was there, and in front of the portrait, on the floor, was a book that hadn't been there before. I was absolutely certain, because I'd cleaned my office floor that very morning. I picked it up. It was a biography of Carlo Acutis, written by his mother, Antonia Salzano Acutis. Title: A Boy Toward the Altar. A book that wasn't part of our library's collection. A book I'd never seen before. I opened it. It opened on its own to a specific page. Page 127. A chapter titled, "The Signs After Death." I read. The chapter spoke of the numerous graces and miracles attributed to Carlo's intercession after his death. Inexplicable healings, sudden conversions, mysterious protections. And one sentence struck me like a punch to the stomach. Carlo continues to work through his image. Many people have testified that places where his photograph or portrait is present become protected spaces, where evil has difficulty entering, and where peace becomes tangible. I stood there, on my feet, with that book in my hand, and for the first time in 52 years of rational, scientific life, I had to admit a truth that terrified me. There were things I couldn't explain, things that escaped my understanding, things that required faith. The decision the next day was Christmas Eve. The library closed at noon. I convened everyone in my office. Dr. Moretti, Chiara Luca, Elena, Martina Paolo, Mrs. Rosa. 8 people who had lived through these same impossible events. I showed them the mysteriously appeared book. I told them about the lights episode. I asked, "What should I do?" Mrs. Rosa spoke first. "Doctor, I'm a simple woman. I haven't studied like you, but I know how to recognize signs. This boy wants to return to his place, and we should let him. Chiara, always attentive to procedures, said. But the circular. Luca interrupted her. To hell with the circular. Sorry, Chiara. But in 3 days, things have happened that violate the laws of physics. Computers locking up for no reason, heat disappearing, books flying, shelves collapsing, all after removing that portrait. I'm an atheist, but faced with these things, I no longer know what I am. Dr. Moretti looked at me with those wise eyes that had seen 40 years of library work. Alessandra, you're an intelligent woman. Too intelligent to ignore the evidence when it's in front of you. Put that portrait back in its place, and you'll see that everything will return to normal. I looked at each of them. Then I looked at the portrait, leaning against the wall. Carlo's face, with those dark eyes that seemed to see beyond, looked at me in silence. All right, I finally said, feeling a weight lift from my chest. I'll put it back. Christmas and restoration. I spent Christmas in a strange way. I went to Mass on the evening of the 24th, something I hadn't done in years. I didn't know why. Maybe I was looking for answers. Maybe I was just looking for comfort. The parish priest, in his homily, spoke of signs, of how God speaks through events that seem small, insignificant, but that are actually clear messages for those who have eyes to see. I returned home, and that night, I thought a lot. I thought about my rational life, about my scientific principles, about my certainties, and I realized that, perhaps, absolute certainties don't exist, that perhaps there's room, even in a rational mind, for mystery, for the sacred, for what cannot be measured, but can only be felt. On December 27th, when the library reopened after the holidays, I arrived an hour before official opening. I took the portrait from my office. I carried it downstairs, to the entrance hall. I took the ladder, the screws that Luca had saved, and I hung it back up, exactly in the same spot, with the same screws, at the same height. My hands trembled slightly as I screwed in the last screws. When I finished, I took a step back. The portrait was back in its place. Carlo was looking at the library entrance hall again, with those dark eyes, and that sweet smile. Nothing spectacular happened. No celestial beam of light. No angelic music. No obvious sign. But I felt something change in the air. It was like when, after a violent storm, the sky clears, and the air becomes breathable again. A sensation of peace, of restored order, of protection regained. Luca arrived half an hour later. He saw the portrait, and a huge smile lit up his face. Welcome back, Carlo. Chiara entered, shortly after. She stopped in front of the portrait, bowed her head, and whispered, "Sorry." I don't know if she was apologizing to Carlo, to God, or to herself. Dr. Moretti said nothing. He simply nodded, with a satisfied air, as if he knew it would go exactly this way. And then wonderful things began to happen, or rather, more precisely, things stopped happening. The library's temperature returned to normal. 72 degrees constant, perfectly in line with the boiler's output. The unnatural cold vanished, like fog in the sun. The computer system worked perfectly. 0 lockups, 0 anomalies, 0 inexplicable problems. No books fell, no shelves collapsed, no strange, disturbing, impossible events. It was a normal day. Wonderfully, peacefully, normal. Mrs. Brambilla came to the library on December 28th. When she saw the portrait back in its place, her eyes filled with tears. She said nothing. She approached me, took my hands, squeezed them tight. "Thank you, doctor. Thank you." "It's you who should be thanked," I replied sincerely, "for having given us, him, the exemption, but the administrative issue remained. I had deliberately violated a municipal circular. Sooner or later, Councillor Ferretti would notice, and there would be consequences." On January 2nd, 2025, my office phone rang at 10 in the morning. The name on the display made me shudder. Culture Department. I answered with a steady voice. "Bonvicin, de la Riva Library, Director Conti speaking." "Dr. Conti?" This is Counselor Ferretti. It has come to my attention that in your library there is still a religious image present, despite the circular of November 5th. Can you explain the reason? I took a deep breath. Then I told him. I told him everything. The inexplicable cold, the locked computers, the flying books, the collapsed shelf, the lights going out, the book that appeared from nowhere, every single detail, without omitting anything, without embellishing, just the bare, raw facts. There was a long silence on the phone, so long that I thought he'd hung up. Then Counselor Ferretti's voice returned, but it was different, less formal, more human. Dr. Kunti. I'm 52 years old. I've been a lawyer for 28 years. I've always believed only in what I can see, measure, prove in court. But my mother, who is a woman of unshakable faith, always told me one thing. She said, Giuliano, there are more things in heaven and on earth than your law degree can explain. I never agreed with her. But maybe she was right. What does that mean, Counselor? It means that the circular had the objective of ensuring respect for state secularism, not to combat culture or memory. A blessed who loved knowledge, technology, education, in a public library, can be considered a cultural symbol as well as a religious one. He represents a model of positive youth, of constructive use of technology, of passion for learning. So, officially, I'm granting you an exemption. Carlo Acutis' portrait can remain in the Bonvesan della Riva Library, not as a confessional symbol, but as a cultural and educational figure. I'll draft an official note justifying this exception. Thank you, Counselor. Thank you so much. Don't thank me, Dr. N. Conti. Yes, if other strange events should occur in other libraries or public structures where we've removed similar images, let me know. I'm beginning to believe that certain protections should be respected. I hung up the phone and burst out laughing. A liberating laugh, almost hysterical, of pure relief. Epilogue. 6 months later now, as I write this story, several months have passed since those events. We're in June 2025. Carlo Acutis' portrait is still there, in the entrance hall of the Bonvesan della Riva Library. It's become a small landmark, not only in the library, but in the entire Cordusio neighborhood. Kids come on purpose, even from other areas of Milan, to see it. They look at it with curiosity, ask intelligent questions, try to understand who this boy was, who smiles from a dark wood frame. Some pray, bowing their heads with respect. Others simply stop, smile back at that smile, immortalized in the photograph, and then proceed to the reading rooms. Some take photos and share them on social media with hashtags like hashtag Carlo Acutis, hashtag Blessed Youth, hashtag Computer Saint, hashtag Library Protector. A small spontaneous movement of students has even been born that gathers here every first Friday of the month for an hour of silent study under Carlo's gaze. As they say, the library has returned to being that serene, welcoming, safe place it had always been. Actually, I'd say more. It's become even better. There's a particular atmosphere I can't describe with technical or scientific words. It's simply good. People who enter perceive it immediately. Some regular users have told me that when they cross the threshold they feel welcomed, protected, as if entering a home where they know they're welcome. Arguments have practically disappeared. Book thefts, which were a recurring problem, have been eliminated. Even bathroom vandalism, which forced us to extraordinary cleaning interventions every week, has completely ceased. The statistics confirm this transformation. User satisfaction, measured through anonymous questionnaire, has risen from 77% to 93%. Booked study hours have increased by 45%, and 3 new volunteers have spontaneously offered to help us with children's activities. All 3 saying, independently, the same thing. There's something special about this library, but I've changed. I can no longer say, I'm that inflexible rationalist I was. I've seen things that have unhinged my certainties, and I've learned that reality is much more complex, mysterious, wonderful than I thought. Every morning, when I enter the library, I greet Carlo, mentally, without anyone noticing. And every morning, it seems to me that those dark eyes in the portrait respond with a smile. Mrs. Brambilla continues to come, 3 times a week, always punctual. She always stops in front of the portrait, prays her silent prayers, then goes to look for her beloved historical novels. One afternoon, about 3 months ago, I asked her, "Mrs. Margarita, did you know that something would happen if we removed the portrait?" She looked at me with those blue, watery eyes, and smiled. "I didn't know exactly what would happen, doctor, but I knew Carlo wouldn't be happy. He protected this place, and when you remove a protection, the consequences make themselves felt. Always. But how did he protect it? It's just a portretto. A portretto. It's just a portrait," she agreed. "But it represents someone, and that someone, even though he's in heaven, continues to watch over those who invoke him, who remember him, who give him space." Carlo loved young people, loved culture, loved places where truth is sought. This library is exactly the kind of place he would love to protect. And he does, in his own way. Her words still accompany me. I've done extensive research on Carlo Acutis. I've read his complete biography, written by his mother. I've studied his brief, but extraordinarily intense life. A completely normal boy. Jeans, sweatshirt, computer, PlayStation, dog, friends, but with a faith that burned like fire, a devotion to the Eucharist that led him to daily Mass, a tenderness for Our Lady that made him pray the Rosary every day, and an intelligence applied in service of faith. The website on Eucharistic miracles he'd created at 12 years old is still online, translated into various languages, visited by thousands of people. He died on October 12, 2006 of fulminant leukemia, after only 4 days of devastating illness. But before dying, he'd asked for communion and the anointing of the sick, and he'd said to his mother, "I offer all the sufferings I must endure to the Lord, for the Pope and for the Church." Beatified on October 10th, the city he loved because it was St. Francis's city. Now he rests there, in the Basilica of Santa Maria Maggiore, in the sanctuary of the and his tomb is a site of continuous pilgrimage. I've read about the 2 officially recognized miracles. The first, a Brazilian child from Campo Grande Mateus, born with a very serious pancreatic malformation. Doctors had given him only a few weeks to live. The mother prayed to Carlo, asking for his intercession. The child completely, inexplicably healed. The second miracle, recognized in 2024, concerns a girl from Costa Rica with a very serious head trauma. There, inexplicable healing after prayers to Carlo. And I understood that what happened in our library wasn't a miracle in the spectacular sense of the term. There were no physical healings, besides spectacular supernatural events. It was something more subtle, but perhaps precisely for this reason more powerful. It was a call, a way of saying, "I am here, and this place is dear to my heart." Now, when I look at that portrait in the entrance hall, I no longer see just a photograph. I see an older brother watching over the kids who come here to study. I see a friend of culture, who protects books and knowledge. I see a silent guardian who, by means I don't understand, and perhaps never will, keeps this space safe, serene, open. And I wonder, how many other places, in Italy and the world, are protected like this? How many other portraits, images, symbols that we consider just decoration, are actually spiritual sentinels? How many times do we remove protections without even realizing it, and then marvel when things go wrong? I don't have definitive answers. I'm still a librarian, rationale, in most of my daily decisions. But I've learned that there exists a level of reality that my senses cannot directly perceive, that my instruments cannot measure, but that is as real as the books on the shelves. Perhaps more real. Carlo Acutis, the blessed of computers, the saint of the internet, the boy with the red sweatshirt who loved Jesus in the Eucharist and Our Lady, did not die on October 12th, those mille says, in that hospital in Monza. He continues to live. He continues to work. He continues to protect. Not in a spectacular way, not with lightning and thunder, but with that same discretion and sweetness that characterized him in life. And I, who for 23 years guarded only books and facilitated only access to culture, now know I guard something more. I guard a protected space, a place where a young blessed has chosen to rest his vigilant gaze. The portrait remains there, and it will remain, because I've learned, at my own expense, and to my great surprise, that certain presences should not be removed. They should be honored, respected, welcomed, even when we don't understand them. Especially when we don't understand them. Every time a kid enters the library, stops in front of that portrait, reads the plaque, and asks, "Who was Carlo Acutis?" I smile, because I know that kid is meeting someone who can truly change his life. Someone who, despite dying at 15 years old 19 years ago, continues to be extraordinarily, mysteriously, wonderfully alive. This is my story. The story of how a rational woman learned that not everything can be explained, measured, cataloged. That there exists a mystery that runs through our daily life. And that sometimes, when we remove what protects, we discover how precious that protection was. Carlo has returned to his place, and with him, peace has returned. Call to action. If this story has touched your heart and made you reflect on the mysteries of faith that run through our daily lives, I invite you to learn more about blessed Carlo Acutis and his testimony of modern holiness. His brief but intensely lived life teaches us that sanctity is accessible to everyone, especially, and above all, to the young people of our time. Subscribe to the channel to discover other extraordinary stories that reveal how the saints continue to work among us every day. Leave a like if this account moved you and made you reflect on the power of divine presence, and activate the bell so you don't miss upcoming videos dedicated to Carlo Acutis and other blessed to illuminate our path. Holiness is not distant, not impossible. It's here, close to us, in the small things of every day, in the signs we know how to recognize when we open our hearts to faith.